Hello and welcome to Ode to Local Writers, presented to you by Charlotte County Libraries and History. We're very happy today to be joined by Harry Barnes, local author, and he'll be reading today from his book Over the Barnes Bridge series. Book 1 is called She Called Him Jim. Over the Barnes Bridge is a series of books about my paternal grandparents, Ida and Jim Barnes, and the tragedies they survived in the early 1900s. Ida was a coal miner's daughter from Eckert Mines near Frostburg in the Appalachian Mountains of western Maryland. Jim was born in Baltimore City, Maryland. His father was a carpenter. All events in these books are true, as are people's names and places, mostly. In book 1, She Called Him Jim, the fathers of both Ida and Jim are killed in separate incidents, while Ida and Jim are children. In 1908, when Ida is 15, her brutal stepfather sends her to a reform school in Baltimore City, where she meets 16-year-old Jim, who lives near the reform school with his mentally ill mother. The book tells about their serendipitous meeting, challenges they faced, and their romance and marriage in 1912. Sounds absolutely fascinating. Can't wait to hear. Here's your lovely book.
Thank you.
And welcome. Thank you so much for coming today.
My pleasure. The excerpt that I'll be reading from book 1, She Called Him Jim, and the title has a whole story in itself, but you'll have to read the book to find out about that. There are two scenes that I'll read from the book, and it's beginning at, I think it's chapter 3, and the scenes take place in the small Appalachian mountain town of Friendsville in western Maryland and in Baltimore City, Maryland. My grandmother, Ida Myers, whose father was killed in a hunting accident when she was 7 years old, and a year later her mother, Clara, married another coal miner, Pat Doolin, whom my father referred to as that dirty Scotsman. My grandmother, Ida, was a strong-willed, feisty woman who did not, as my mother said, fade into the woodwork. As a teenager, she was sent to reform school by this mean stepfather, according to family stories. And the curiosity about this drove me to do a lot of research into what actually happened. My imagination had to fill in the voids where I couldn't find facts. But this is the excerpt where Ida is interacting with her. This is actually chapter 8, and two of the children, Ida's siblings, William and Lula, are in this scene, and then Pat Doolin, the dirty old Scotsman. The family had just sat down to supper when William, even though he knew Doolin's strict rule about not talking at mealtime, began to giggle about something Lula had done. "God damn it," Doolin yelled as he kicked the underside of the table, sending bowls of stew and glasses of milk skittering and spilling all over Clara's blue checkered tablecloth. "Quiet, a man don't need yucking at his table." They all knew better than to speak or to look him in the eye, so they sat with eyes downcast, waiting for his stormy mood to pass. As he reached to take another spoonful of his stew, he bellowed, "Ida, clean up this mess." "You clean it up. You made it," said Ida in a calm, strong voice, her face red as a hot coal, her eyes aflame with all her pent-up hatred. Clara was so shaken by Ida's outburst that she shuddered and dropped the glass she was holding, spilling more milk onto her tablecloth. Looking up, she saw her husband's face turn to stone, placing his meaty, calloused hands flat on the table. His massive chest swelled as he pushed himself up ever so slowly. Then, kicking his chair back against the china closet, he whipped off his wide leather belt. Ida's dark eyes never left Dolan's face, her defiance unwavering, but her mother's voice came loud and clear. "Run, girl. Get out of here. Run. Run." And Ida ran and kept on running until late that night, when, exhausted, she sat down by the creek and wept. It was nearly midnight when Ida crept back home and peered through the dining room window into the foreboding darkness inside. Seeing no movement, she slipped in through the kitchen door and stopped to listen. Hearing Dolan snoring like the boar hog he was, she thought it would be safe to climb the ladder to her bed. Exhausted as she was, the turmoil inside her would not let her sleep. It was nearly daylight before she finally dozed off. By daylight the next morning, in his role as constable, Dolan had his black stallion saddled and was off to serve an eviction notice on a neighbor 5 miles up Bear Creek, a task he always enjoyed, an opportunity to bully and intimidate. Busy with the day's work, Pat's fury of the night before subsided somewhat. When he got home later that day and saw Ida had returned, he said nothing. He had become more determined than ever to get rid of her once and for all, and had formulated the first part of his plan. Hidden on the top shelf of the kitchen cupboard, slid way back out of sight, he had a tobacco tin where he put money he coerced from people in bribes, in exchange for which he would reduce a fine or show some other leniency. "Clara, woman, come here. What the hell, where the hell's me money?" She had a basket of eggs and Patrick Jr. in one arm and little Clara in the other. She was tired, dirty, and sweaty from weeding vegetables. She was in no mood for his ranting and raving. "What the hell are you bellowing about? Me money I collect from criminals is gone. Someone stole it. By God, I'll find out who done it. And they'll pay, sure enough. They'll pay all right. I'm here all day, Patrick. No one could have gotten into it. You must be mistaken." That evening he lined up the children for his inquisition. The outcome was a foregone conclusion, but Dolan needed to feign due process, so Clara would be forced to go along. He confronted the children one by one, poking his index finger hard into their chest, staring them in the eye and asking, "Was it you took me money?" Terrified one by one, they all answered no, they had not done it. Phase 2 in Dolan's plan was the search of their sleeping quarters, up in the loft where the girls slept, and around the pallets in the room off the dining room that served as beds for the young ones. "Clara, you take the loft and I'll look around down here." Knowing full well that Clara would find the money under Ida's mattress, he busied himself turning over pallets and poking around while the children stood frozen in front of the window, looking out into the vegetable garden and barnyard where their hound Boomer was sleeping under an apple tree and the chickens were scratching for bugs. Clara was dumbfounded by what she discovered, but knew she had to climb back down that ladder and face Dolan and the children. With trembling hands, she held the bundle of dollar bills and coins wrapped in a red bandana. Her dark eyes seemed strangely large, her brow furrowed, a forced, tight-lipped smile frozen on her face. She pleaded, "I'm sure there's a logical explanation for this, Pat. And who be the thief in my own home? Which one was it, woman?" Her eyes to the floor, not wanting to look at the children, in a nearly inaudible voice, she said, "Ida." Ignoring Ida's plea of innocence, he told all the children to get to bed. Ida did not move. With tears in her eyes, she quietly stated, "Mama, you know I do not steal." "You too, girl, to bed with you," he growled at Ida. "You've caused enough trouble for one day. Your mother and I will decide what's to be done with you." Later that night, Doolin told Clara that Ida would have to be disciplined. Clara said nothing. She felt trapped and did not know what to do to help her daughter. She could not come up with any explanation as to how the money got there. It never occurred to her that her husband could have been so devious and cruel as to plant the money under Ida's mattress. And even if she suspected, she could not take sides with Ida against her husband. Ida's out of control, Clara. She won't no longer listen to us. She's just getting worse. God knows what's coming next. That girl needs a firm hand, professional help. Ida's just downright stubborn, and I won't have it. I'm sending her to a place she can't get in trouble no more, a place they'll teach her to obey rules and change her ways. It's for the best, Clara. It's chapter 9. It's 1908. The following week, her belongings packed in a small valise, Ida and Doolin boarded the Confluence and Oakland train at the Friendsville station for the first leg of their trip to Baltimore and the Maryland Industrial School for Girls. They changed trains in Oakland, Maryland for the 8-hour trip to Baltimore on the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, traveling east through the high Allegheny Mountains. Doolin sat close beside Ida, a foul-smelling cigar poking out from between his dark, drooping mustaches. We ought to be there by midnight. Train don't break down, said Doolin, speaking to no one in particular. Ida continued to stare out the train window into the billowing cloud of black coal smoke blowing back from the engine ahead. She felt dull and lifeless, her world unreal. There was only the rocking motion of the train and the rhythmic clanking of the steel wheels. From the corner of her eye, she could see the brown tobacco drool at the tip of Doolin's oily mustache, a few inches below his flabby lips. Overpowering even the cigar stink, the rank odor of the onerous bully next to her filled her nostrils, nearly turning her stomach. Her eyes burned with hatred, her mind whirled with helplessness and fear. By nightfall, they reached the flatlands of the Piedmont Plateau, shortly thereafter arriving in Washington, D.C., and then on into Baltimore City. A trolley ride later, just before midnight, they arrived at the school. They were greeted by a tall, unsmiling woman in a white blouse buttoned up nearly to her chin. A gray vest was likewise severely buttoned. Her dark hair was drawn back into a bun, and she wore high-topped black boots laced up around heavy dark stockings, which were nearly covered by a long black pleated skirt. I'm Constable Patrick Doolin from Friendsville, ma'am. I am Superintendent Konstantin Dmitrik, Mr. Doolin. I received your letter last week. I have been expecting you and Ida. After brief formalities, including some paperwork that he was required to sign, Doolin was preparing to leave when Ida caught the smug look on his face and exploded. I hope you rot in hell, you filthy lying bastard. She headed for him with her fists raised and fire in her eyes. Dmitrik was barely able to restrain her. Ida saw Doolin smile as the door closed behind him. She became rigid and lifeless. Bitter tears streaked freely down her soft young cheeks, but her eyes were still on fire. This is chapter 10, the Maryland Industrial School for Girls. And I'll give you a little background on the industrial schools. In the early 1900s, the girls deemed to be stubborn could be sent to state reform schools called industrial schools for girls. In those years, a woman's primary societal role was seen as caretaker and nurturer. Girls were trained to be docile in behavior and competent in housekeeping chores in preparation for lives of service to their husband and proper guides to their children. State laws prohibited girls and women from unladylike behavior such as smoking in public, using bad language, visiting gambling places, and patronizing liquor saloons. In addition, young girls aged 7 to 16 could be incarcerated for being stubborn, as determined by a parent or other authority figure. It's interesting to note, however, that if they were epileptic, insane, feeble-minded, paralytic, pregnant, or had a contagious disease, they were not admitted to an industrial school, but were referred elsewhere or returned to their parents. There were also industrial schools for boys. Chapter 10. Superintendent Dimitri led Ida down a dimly lit hallway to a row of doors, stopping at one near the end of the hall. "This will be your room, Ida. Your roommate is asleep. Her name is Veronica. There is a washroom at the end of the hall on the right and toilets to the left. All outside doors are locked, and you are not permitted out of your room except to go to the washroom or toilet after 10 p.m. Is that clear?" Ida looked up and then down the bleak hallway, then turned her icy, dark, defiant eyes on the superintendent, who did not flinch. She knew all too well what Ida was thinking. How the hell do I get out of here? Ida said nothing, just turned to enter her room. "You will answer when spoken to." Ida stopped without turning around. Feelings of hopelessness and fear had begun to dampen her raging anger. The superintendent's rough command rekindled her deep-rooted instinct for survival, fanning those simmering embers of hatred back to life. In a nearly inaudible voice, she managed to control her anger toward her new enemy and hiss out slowly through pursed lips, syllable by syllable, "Yes, I understand." "Good. Have a good night's sleep, although it will be brief. You will be awakened at 6 a.m. for calisthenics, breakfast at 7, work begins at 7:30. You'll be given your work assignment in the morning. Good night." With that, the superintendent strode off, stiff as a broomstick, down the tunnel-like hallway, the sound of her boot heels clicking on the gray tile hall echoing and then fading into the emptiness. Ida slipped into bed but did not sleep. "Oh, Papa, help me, please, help me. I'm so scared, so scared." Exhausted, near daybreak, she finally fell asleep, the unfamiliar coarse pillow beneath her head soaked with salty tears. And so she called him Jim's book one in the series. Book two is the Barnes Bridge, which is another episode in their lives that starts with the death of a baby during the Spanish influenza and World War I. Book 3 is being written right now. It should be published in the fall. In the interim, the historical fictions take a lot of research and time, and I write short stories also. And I've written a series of, we have a condo in Inglewood, and so I keep hearing stories about things that happen in condos. So I've written some sort of whimsical mystery stories that take place in condos. So Condo Capers is a collection of mystery stories. It's a fun book. And I do have a website if you would like to go on the website and get more information about me or about the books. And it's easy to find. It's Bear Creek is where my grandparents grew up, so my website is bearcreekbarnes.com.